The New Orleans Saints are set to give rookie quarterback Spencer Rattler one more shot if Derek Carr can't go this weekend, and it's the right choice. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look at how the New Orleans Saints will manage with the loss of starting cornerback Paulson Adebo. Head coach Dennis Allen giving us some insight on how the Saints plan to attack that. We'll dive into the signing of wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Yes, the New Orleans Saints did sign the veteran wide receiver. We'll get into that as well as some analytic comparisons between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Chargers. And to kick us all off here, we're going to be taking a look at Spencer Rattler being named the starting quarterback if Derek Carr is not ready to go against the Los Angeles Chargers. I'll tell you why that's the right move for the New Orleans Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So Dennis Allen telling us during his Monday media availability that quarterback Spencer Rattler will be the starter if Derek Carr does not somehow end up being ready to go in this upcoming game against the Los Angeles Chargers. It is highly unlikely that Derek Carr will be ready. He only started throwing the football over the course of the last couple of days. He'll have another throwing session today on Tuesday that will kind of give a better indication of where he is, and we'll see where things go. But don't be fooled by Derek Carr's doubtful game designation from last week. The reason why he was doubtful was not because the Saints felt that he had progressed to a point where they could potentially make the last-second decision to start him up against the Denver Broncos last week. That doubtful designation was more so that they wanted to keep the door open for him to be the emergency third quarterback on the inactive list, but they ultimately did not go that route. He was not designated as the emergency third quarterback in that game. So we kind of now know a little bit about like the context around what that doubtful designation actually meant last week. So with that being the case, it doesn't seem like there's been much progress yet for Derek Carr. Probably not a lot of progression available to him since he just started throwing the football again this week. We'll see how those throwing sessions go, but it really seems like next weekend at Carolina will be the timeline, or at least the most viable or appropriate timeline for Derek Carr. Until then, the team will continue to get a look at its rookie starting quarterback in Spencer Rattler. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of argument, of course, around whether or not Spencer Rattler deserves the opportunity or whether or not he does it. But I will say this. The New Orleans Saints are making the right choice by going with Spencer Rattler. I will tell you why. The fact of the matter is that the Saints aren't just trying to win a game on Sunday. They're trying to get an idea of what they have in a potential future quarterback in Spencer Rattler. I've said over and over again, it could be Spencer Rattler. It could be Jake Haener. Odds are it's neither of those quarterbacks that will end up being the future of this New Orleans Saints franchise. Odds are that some other quarterback ends up entering the conversation before it's all said and done. That's just typically the story when it comes to day three quarterbacks. They don't typically turn into a starting quarterback for you, obviously, with a couple of exceptions around the league, including, of course, Brock Purdy with the San Francisco 49ers, who some believe is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. But when you look at where Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener were drafted, the draft projections, the things like that, don't typically line up with future starter in the NFL. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't be either one of them. I'm just saying that the odds are against them. Can they navigate and beat the odds? 100% absolutely. But it's going to be challenging because eventually someone else is probably going to be a part of this conversation, whether it's another free agent quarterback or whether it's another drafted quarterback if the New Orleans Saints get desperate enough for that to be the case. Don't forget that there is always the chance that there's a head coaching change over the course of the offseason, and that head coach is going to want to build the team around the way that they want their team built. And so that could mean an entirely different approach to the quarterback position at that point. So there's a lot of different kind of things here, But for the New Orleans Saints as they are, they have to figure out what they have in Spencer Rattler. And I do not believe that the New Orleans Saints believe that the last 2 games have been a real look at who Spencer Rattler is as a starting quarterback. Your entire interior offensive line down. You had Chris Olave for 2 plays. You didn't have Rashid Shaheed in the most recent game. You're throwing to rookie wide receivers with a rookie quarterback, with your 4th center on the season, all these other things. The New Orleans Saints are not going to look at that and say that they have gotten a full-on look or an accurate assessment of who Spencer Rattler is as a quarterback. You might feel that way, and that's okay if you do. I'm just telling you that the Saints do not. Going into this game, the Saints could potentially be getting back 4 big pieces to their offense that would give them a better opportunity to fully assess what they have in Spencer Rattler. Interior offensive lineman Cesar Ruiz and Lucas Patrick. Lucas Patrick, of course, was the 2nd highest graded offensive lineman by Pro Football Focus before his injury and at the beginning of the season. They could potentially be getting Taysom Hill back, the tight end that it plays a ton of roles for this team, including several in the backfield that absolutely helps to rejuvenate that run game and give you additional playmaking ability over on the offensive side. And then, of course, your top star wide receiver in Chris Olave, plus now the newly signed wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling, which we'll dive into here in just a little bit. So the New Orleans Saints absolutely believe, and I'm telling you that the New Orleans Saints believe this, as I know them to believe exactly this, that they believe that they'll get a better read on who Spencer Rattler is, what he needs to work on, where his development is, how much still needs to be done, all of these other things, by getting a look at him with more of their starting lineup and a healthier offense, particularly a healthier interior offensive line in front of him. So just a couple of things to consider there as to why New Orleans might make this decision to go with Spencer Rattler, despite the fact that you saw Jake Haener and a late push by the New Orleans Saints offense against an albeit, light defense for the Denver Broncos at that point, march down and score a touchdown, but still very good to see from Jake Haener, and could have maybe put some doubt in the minds of the New Orleans Saints that going back to Spencer Rattler was the right thing to do, but it doesn't look like that was enough. The Saints keeping this all in context, unsurprisingly. What you want to see Spencer Rattler improve in, the first thing is, does he perform better when there is better protection there? One of the things that you heard Dennis Allen say on Monday is that he really liked what he saw from Spencer Rattler, the young quarterback, when he was protected. The issues came when protection broke down. He mentioned that in his Friday conference call as well. So the next thing that you're really looking for Spencer Rattler is a pre-snap diagnosis, the ability to know where pressure is coming from, and when that pressure comes off the edge, particularly unblocked, like we saw last week on several occasions coming off the left side of the offensive line, how to get to his hot reads, how to quickly get the ball out of his hands. Those are going to be some of the big things that you're looking at, and not hesitating between, and this is really tough, navigating, keeping your eyes downfield and when to pull it and run. We saw the magic of Spencer Rattler at certain points last week where he decided to pull down and run, and when he was decisive about it. But on a 3rd and 2, there was one point where he pulled up and hesitated when he could have gotten that first down, and instead tried to extend the play as a passer, ended up only picking up 1 yard. Saints had to go for it on 4th and 1. They got it, but still one of those plays where if he's just a little bit more decisive off the bat, you might have been able to pick that up and keep that momentum going with a fresh set of downs. Those are a couple things you're looking for when it comes to Spencer Rattler, who is the presumptive starter Sunday against the Los Angeles Chargers, unless Derek Carr makes some kind of near miraculous recovery in time for Sunday's game against the Chargers. But as of right now, I would expect to see Spencer Rattler under center. Coming up next, let's take a look at the signing of wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling, as well as some of the analytic comparisons between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Chargers, just to help us set the table for the upcoming matchup this weekend. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, who right now aren't feeling too hot about the New Orleans Saints going into this matchup. Have the Saints as 7.5-point underdogs on the road up against the Los Angeles Chargers. So keeping that in mind, you think the New Orleans Saints might be able to cover the spread? Think they might win outright? All that and more you can get in on over at FanDuel today. And if you get a hunch during the game, you can open up your FanDuel app and then check out the live play-by-play as well as stats all on the same page where you place your bets. A little bit of a one-stop shop for you on Sundays. Oh, and don't forget, with the MLB playoffs, the NBA tipping off this week, as well as hockey now underway. You can get in on all of that over with our friends at FanDuel as well. And right now, if you're a new customer, $200 in bonus bets coming your way, guaranteed if you win your first $5 bet. That's all ready for you over at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel.com. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the place you got to go, especially if you are a small business owner looking to hire and, of course, build out the team for your business. You know your business is only as good as the people that you hire to help support it. That's why so many trust LinkedIn Jobs, because over at LinkedIn Jobs, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other job sites. So you're getting the best of the best when you head over to LinkedIn to post your jobs. If you're not looking at LinkedIn, you're simply looking in the wrong place. And over on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of posting their job. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn who also make it a little bit easier for you as well. They've got other pieces to help to kind of make the process a little bit easier for you. They'll help you write job descriptions, things like that too. So much for you to find over at LinkedIn. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints signed wide receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling, the veteran wideout that they have pursued for a couple years in a row now. But along with getting this deal done, there is still so much more the New Orleans Saints are going to have to do in order to really be back to competing this weekend up against the Los Angeles Chargers. So this signing is not a one move fix all kind of a situation. This is just one of a few things the New Orleans Saints have got to get going their way if they want to turn this season around in any way. And look, I'm not going to tell you that the Saints are going to be able to turn their season around. This is a tough task for any team. We just kind of have to wait and see how everything goes. But the signing of Marquez Valdes-Scantling is a smart signing. It's one that we've been looking at for a couple years now. The New Orleans Saints have been tied to this wide receiver over and over and over again throughout the last couple of years. And so third time's the charm. The New Orleans Saints and Marquez Valdes-Scantling connected back in 2022 in several reports after Valdes-Scantling ended up signing with the Kansas City Chiefs. A report coming out with the Kansas City Chiefs, a report coming out saying that the Saints were interested in him this offseason after he signed with the Buffalo Bills. Another report coming out from Jordan Schultz saying that the Saints were interested in him. And then now he gets released by the Buffalo Bills just about a week ago after the Bills acquire wide receiver Amari Cooper in a trade from the Cleveland Browns. And now, finally, the New Orleans Saints get their guy, the 6'4", 206-pound wide receiver, tested coming into the NFL years ago with 4.37 speed. He's 30 years old now. I don't know what his 4.37 speed looks like to this day, but he's done enough to stay on rosters, whether he was with the Green Bay Packers years ago, then going to the Kansas City Chiefs, being signed by the Buffalo Bills, and pursued by several other teams in the midst of all that, by the way. The Saints were not the only team that was in on Valdes-Scantling 2 years ago. They weren't the only ones that were in on him at the beginning of this offseason. The Commanders were another team that reached out to him just going into this during this time while the Saints were pursuing him because they needed help at wide receiver. So a lot of teams continue to be interested in this guy, and it's probably for pretty good reason, but we've laid out the concerns here, right? The catch percentage, less than 50% on his career, 9% drop percentage. Those are the things that you don't want to see come up and be a major factor for him while he's in the black and gold, but we'll see where things go as they continue to move forward. Either way, the New Orleans Saints needed help at wide receiver. The thing that's going to be interesting is with the expectation that Chris Olave will be ready to go this weekend against the Los Angeles Chargers. That's my expectation. That's just speculation, just because he's now had a lot of days to get through concussion protocol. Dennis Allen saying today that he's still in concussion protocol, which is not surprising. Remember, in order for you to progress through concussion protocol, you have to practice, right? Some of those metrics are about aerobic exercises and participating in certain drills and participating in team drills and all these other things. You can't progress through concussion protocol when you're not practicing. And the team has not been practicing because they had kind of that mini bye week between Thursday and Wednesday. So they're going to get a little bit of time here. And so once they get back to practices tomorrow, I think you're going to see Chris Olave quickly move through the rest of concussion protocol and then be good to go. That's my expectation. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But assuming that Chris Olave is good to go against Los Angeles Chargers, will Marquez Valdes-Scantling be the guy to line up outside opposite him? Or will he not be ready in the Saints system just yet, requiring them to go again to Cedric Wilson Jr. and Bub Means and Mason Tipton and some of these other guys opposite Olave? That's going to be one of the big things to watch over the course of this week, is how quickly Valdes-Scantling is able to kind of progress, if you will, in the game plan and be ready to go. The thing about it is that he's a veteran. This is going to be his fourth team. He's been in some expansive offenses between the Chargers and the Bills and the Packers. So he should be able to pick up this playbook just fine. Saints have been interested in him for a while now. So I think they're going to be able to kind of get him through this pretty quickly. Mostly, like everyone in the NFL kind of runs majority the same stuff. They just call it different things. So it's mostly going to be him just kind of learning the language. But getting him in on a Monday and getting him signed on a Monday before that Sunday game certainly helps to push all of that progress into the side of the column, or over to the column that says more likely than the column that says less likely. So you get a big body target. You get somebody that has some field stretching ability with his speed to kind of help you. I don't want to say replace, because I think you need multiple players to replace a Rashid Shaheed, but kind of replace the speed element, to borrow from what Dennis Allen told me today they like about Marquez Callaway. I think that that's going to be the big benefit when it comes to him. And then you have to figure out the other stuff with Rashid Shaheed, but they've got a good returner in Jermaine Jackson, who looked really good Thursday night up against the Denver Broncos. We'll see how he's able to produce against Los Angeles Chargers. So that's the update on the signing of Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I will say I do not expect that deal to be a multi-year deal. Multi-year deals in the middle of a season are very, very rare. When you sign a player in the middle of the season after week one, their contract is non-guaranteed, and you only pay a pro rate of the vet minimum if you give that player a vet minimum. So that's big, and that's probably the more advantageous thing to do here. So I expect that to be the case for the New Orleans Saints. So the next thing that I wanted to take a look at here is going to be taking a look at some of the analytic comparisons between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm not going to go like super deep divey kind of strange on this one. I'm mostly going to focus on some of the things that are really at the kind of top of the conversation. So we'll look at like passing versus rushing, or passing versus passing defense, rushing versus rushing defense, pressure versus blocking, some of those other things. And I want to tell you some of the things that I think are key. So for the New Orleans Saints offense, one of the biggest things that's going to be key is keeping pressure off of Spencer Rattler, potentially getting Cesar Ruiz back, potentially getting Lucas Patrick back. Should be able to help with that, but you're still missing the best player on your offensive line in center Eric McCoy. So still a bit of concern there. The New Orleans Saints right now, according to Next Gen Stats, when it comes to pressure rate allowed 25th in the NFL. And then for the Chargers, pressure rate generated 12th in the NFL. So you're looking at strength versus weakness. Los Angeles Chargers strength, New Orleans Saints weakness. So that's going to be a big one to watch. Another big one is looking at pressure on the opposite side. The New Orleans Saints 29th in the NFL when it comes to pressure rating, one of the worst pressure rates generated in the NFL so far this season. Outside of Carl Granderson and Chase Young, these guys just don't have pressure players, right? So they've had a lot of trouble generating pressure on opposing quarterbacks. However, the Los Angeles Chargers could give the New Orleans Saints pass rush life in this game. 30th in pressure rate allowed, which means they're allowing one of the highest pressure rates in the NFL over on the offensive side. So we could see pass rush being the big difference in this game. Can the New Orleans Saints find a way, going up against a very poor pressure rating offensive line for the Los Angeles Chargers? Can they find a way to get their pass rush going? That's going to be a big thing. The Chargers offense is one of the offenses in the NFL, top 12 in terms of rushing yards, top 10 in terms of those that rush the most. The New Orleans Saints number 30 in the NFL in defending the run. So that's going to be big for them. Finally, the New Orleans Saints number 23 in the NFL when it comes to passing efficiency. The Chargers number 10 when it comes to defending the pass and the efficiency that they allowed. So that's going to be big for them. Big time kind of strength versus weakness matchups all over this game. So those are all going to be big ones to watch. We'll dive into more of that here throughout the week, but I just wanted to set the table for you now. Coming up next, I want to take a look at how the New Orleans Saints will counteract the loss of Paulson Adebo. Dennis Allen laying out the plan for us plainly on Monday. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to our friends over at Game Time, the best place to go to buy your tickets, whether you're planning months in advance or moments in advance. Looking at the New Orleans Saints and Chargers game right now on Game Time, $53 tickets to experience the incredible stadium of SoFi Stadium, one of the better stadiums in the NFL right now. And of course, the New Orleans Saints will be playing there this weekend against Los Angeles Chargers for $52 a ticket. You can go ahead and see them in action if you're in that Los Angeles area. Maybe show up and show out in a way that you weren't able to during training camp. There's an opportunity for you there. So I highly recommend go and check out Game Time, as well as with Game Time Picks, which immediately curates and then shows you their best deals so you don't have to sort through thousands of tickets, all in pricing. If you toggle it on, no surprise fees at the end when you get to your cart. Pay what you expect. That's what Game Time's all about, taking the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can do so at Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints have a very clear vision of what it is that they're going to do to overcome the loss of Paulson Adebo, New Orleans Saints starting cornerback, who had a broken femur in last week's Thursday night game. Such a rare NFL injury. I think Mike Triplett talked about not too long ago over at New Orleans Football, finding only like 2 of those in a career. I think about DeAndre Baker being one of those and everything like that. So a really tough, I was going to say really tough break, but that feels really inappropriate. So I'll just say a really tough shakeout for Paulson Adebo in this situation and the New Orleans Saints in this situation. I think a lot of people are going to talk about Paulson Adebo from the perspective of his injuries, but in doing that, ignoring the impact that Paulson Adebo really had on defense. Leader on interceptions with 3, helped to lead the NFL, despite the fact that he was leading the NFL in targets, had one of the highest forcing completion percentages, had one of the highest counts of forcing completions, had one of the highest pass breakup numbers as well in the league. Not just passes defended, but literally getting his hands on passes and knocking them away from receivers. He was so clutch in a lot of those other areas, or at least performed extremely well in some of those other areas. Hard to call him clutch, right? Because he gave up the 30-yard pass interference penalty against the Falcons and stuff like that. But you get the idea here that you took the good with the bad when it came to Paulson Adebo, and the good was really, really good. And it's really unfortunate that this happens too. He's in a contract year. He bet on himself, didn't make any fuss, any noise at all about his contract, just went right into this season and started playing his tail off, and then unfortunately ends up with this injury. And now we might have seen the last snap of Paulson Adebo as a New Orleans Saint. The expectation is that he should be ready to go by the time that he opens up as an unrestricted free agent after this offseason, or going into the offseason. But we'll see how things go for him. Maybe there's a chance that he ends up back in New Orleans. Maybe not. We'll see where things go. But the Saints right now have big shoes to fill in terms of what they had in Paulson Adebo and how they might be able to fill in. So let's break down how the Saints intend to do this. You might think to yourself, well, Ross, it's obvious how they're going to do this. They're going to have Kool-Aid McKinstry, the second-round rookie out of Alabama, come in and fill in place of Paulson Adebo. Yeah, that's what I thought too. But the New Orleans Saints are going to do something slightly different, and really should have seen this coming right away. Many of you probably did, but me, dummy, did not. So here's what the New Orleans Saints are going to do. In base sets, meaning 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers, 4 defensive backs, including 2 corners and 2 safeties, the Saints are going to have Marshon Lattimore and Alontae Taylor on the outside. And then when they go into nickel sets, which, to be fair, they're going to spend most of their time in these nickel sets anyway, they'll move Alontae Taylor to the inside and then have Kool-Aid McKinstry starting on the outside, or playing on the outside opposite Marshon Lattimore. So technically, Kool-Aid McKinstry might not be a starter this weekend, based upon if the Saints go out there with 3 linebackers on the first snap or 5 defensive backs on the first snap. That's going to be the big delineation between whether or not Kool-Aid McKinstry is seen as a starter. But no matter what, he's going to be the guy tasked with picking up the most of the slack, if you will, with the loss of Paulson Adebo. So here's the thing that's so intriguing about Kool-Aid McKinstry and Marshon Lattimore, both of those guys have a reputation. Kool-Aid McKinstry from his collegiate days, Marshon Lattimore from his NFL days, of making quarterbacks look past them. And what I mean by look past them, I mean going further in their progression. They're not throwing the ball at Marshon Lattimore. Marshon Lattimore has played 6 games so far this season. We'll call it 5.5 because he left kind of partway through the second half of the game last week and then missed that week 2 game, remember, where they actually started, did the same thing with Alontae Taylor and Kool-Aid McKinstry week 2. They'll do that again here week 8. Despite the fact that Marshon Lattimore has played so much, he's only been targeted 12 times. And then you look back at Kool-Aid McKinstry's senior year with Alabama, where he played a very similar system. We'll break that down here in a second. Kool-Aid McKinstry was targeted only 29 times throughout that season. So both of these guys have a tendency of playing sticky enough in coverage that the quarterbacks end up having to look past them in the passing game. So that could be something that works to the Saints' favor. Remember, we just talked about the Los Angeles Chargers having the 30th ranked pressure rate when it comes to offense, i.e. they give up some of the highest pressure rates on the offensive side. That could open the opportunities for the Saints to build a little bit of a pass rush in this game because of the coverage that they get on the back end. So if Kool-Aid McKinstry can play close in coverage and do all the things that you saw him do in college, then that ends up partnering very, very well with Marshon Lattimore. And make no mistake about it, right? These Los Angeles Chargers are number 30 in the NFL in passing yards right now, but they're also number 32 in the NFL, dead last in the league when it comes to passing attempts. This is a team that loves to run the football. If the Saints can find a way to force Justin Herbert and that Los Angeles Chargers offense to throw the football, to drop back, and to force them into situations where they're going into straight dropbacks as opposed to play action, things like that, i.e. building a lead, which I don't know, considering how this New Orleans Saints offense has kind of fallen apart here recently. That could play into the hands of guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, guys like Marshon Lattimore, Alontae Taylor, and the coverage on the back end. The Saints have a lot that they still have to get right here. Like we mentioned with the signing of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, that's good that they went out there and they found somebody in the open market that can help them out in that area. But the Saints still have so much that they have to improve. Their run defense, their offensive line, tackling, all these other things. Although only 7 missed tackles last week, and a lot of those missed tackles coming in the backfield on Bo Nix, unfortunately. So not a lot of broken tackles, missed tackles in terms of tackling a ball catcher or a ball carrier or a route runner or something like that. So just something to keep in mind there in terms of, missed tackles, where they take place, all these other things. So the Saints are going to have their work cut out for them up against the Chargers. But for Kool-Aid McKinstry, this should be, again, another comfortable adjustment for him, just like it was against the Dallas Cowboys. And now he's going to have Marshon Lattimore across from him, which means they're probably going to target him quite a bit. But then if he can start to make them move past, that forces Justin Herbert into his progressions a bit more. And that could open up some avenues for the Saints to be able to get some pressure and potentially get some sacks in this game. And so for Kool-Aid McKinstry, who's coming out of that Nick Saban defense, the last great Alabama defense, as Bama is currently burning, the way that it looks like right now, to borrow from my good friend Matt Moscona over at LouisianaSports.net, the consistency of the game plan should work really well for Kool-Aid McKinstry. Nick Saban, heavy press man coverage defense. Dennis Allen, heavy press man coverage defense. Some of the principles that Nick Saban used in terms of the rip Liz, pattern matching and things like that, there's elements of that in the New Orleans Saints defense, except that they just kind of ask you to play man coverage. Whereas in Nick Saban's defense, you kind of had to play zone first and then shift to man coverage. Every zone coverage call on defense eventually becomes man coverage. And of course, when we're talking about zone coverage, we're talking about picking in, having to cover a certain area of the field. Whereas man coverage, you're turning your back to the quarterback. You're focused on the guy that you're assigned to guarding and everything. So it's going to be pretty simple for Kool-Aid McKinstry coming in this one. One of the things that Kool-Aid was always praised for going into this season when he was selected in the second round by the New Orleans Saints was that he, quote, plays the game the right way. So he plays with technique, he plays with fundamentals, all these other things. He's a remarkably talented player, but he also trusts his fundamentals and trusts his technique. That is music to guys like Joe Woods and Dennis Allen and Marcus Robertson's ears when it comes to a defensive back. So Kool-Aid McKinstry, the next big test for him starting up here, up against the Chargers this weekend and going along throughout the season as Paulson Adebo will be out for the rest of the year. So there you go. Let's look at how the Saints manage without Paulson Adebo, the signing of Marquez Valdes-Scantling, what it does for the New Orleans Saints, what they need to see from Spencer Rattler, who is expected and presumed to be the starter this weekend. We appreciate you very much for being here. Tomorrow we'll come back. We'll dive into more film and we'll take a look at more of the analytics around the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Chargers. Until then, make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL, Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU for everything going on all around your favorite teams and sports. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.